Kia ora, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very delighted to be a part of this conference. I get to speak quite a lot and don't necessarily look forward to some of the engagement that I have to deliver to, and especially some of the industries that I'm invited to talk to. But sport is definitely one that I can get very, very excited about. If I appear a little nervous, please don't take that personally. It's not that I'm concerned about you or speaking in front of you. My family is from Manchester in the UK, in England, and there's a relatively big game on first thing tomorrow morning that's going to decide the premiership, and my family split in two over it, so my future and inheritance are on the line overnight, so a little anxious around that. My actual background is in anthropology. So I'm an anthropologist and do what's called corporate anthropology. So I spend most of my time going into modern organisations, helping them understand the cultures that they created and to what extent those cultures are setting them up for a future or in fact are going to be the very premise of their own demise. It's not often understood in terms of corporates just how important culture is. There's a lot of talk about culture and recognition that it has a role to play, but they often just don't appreciate the impact that culture can have. And it wasn't until some research was done by Professor Mike West at the London School of Economics, one of the few people on the planet to predict the GFC before it actually happened, so a relatively in-tuned guy. Did some research over a period of time and found that on average in organisations your culture is 8 times more impactful on your performance variance than your chosen strategy is. Now that doesn't mean to say that we don't need strategy, of course we do. What he's actually suggesting is the strategy is the plan, the culture is the performance and delivery or non-delivery of that plan. And so partly what my role is in organisations is to help people understand who have you become as a result of doing what you do. And will that serve you in the future? So I'd like to take us on a little bit of a journey, if I may. This isn't a complete journey, it's not even a thorough journey given the time that we have together, but I'd like to take you on a bit of a journey in terms of my observations of New Zealand and New Zealand culture and what that might mean for us in terms of the industries, and in this case, sports and rec, and your own future. Is that of interest to you? Can I just have a show of hands if that sounds like an interesting... I'm so relieved because I had nothing else to talk about. That's good. So let me just explain a little bit about anthropology before I get started. I often have people sort of approach me after I've spoken and go, I didn't understand what you were talking about. I thought you guys dug around in the dirt and looked for ancient artefacts. So there's often some confusion between anthropology and archaeology. Archaeology are the extremely famous people that earn lots of money. And they do that. They actually dig in sort of ruins and look for old artefacts. Anthropologists are the poor people you've never heard of, and we're kind of a little invisible, so we spend our time just observing people in communities. Our fundamental challenge is to understand and appreciate what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be human in Aotearoa as opposed to South Africa? What does it mean to be human playing rugby as opposed to playing netball? And what are the consequences in terms of ritual, meaning, symbolism, and belief patterns that emerge? And to understand those, unpack those, and look for some patterns. We're often referred to as specialising in this area here, vujardé. I'm sure you've heard the opposite of déjà vu, the French saying. Déjà vu being that experience whereby you feel like you've been through this before. How many of you have ever had that? That kind of, I often get goosebumps with it. When I used to have hair, it used to stand up. That feeling where, whoa, what's going on here? This has happened to me before. So anthropologists have to avoid that at all costs. We cannot afford to walk into an environment and assume that we've been here before, we know what's going on, and therefore we fully understand. We have to start off with complete naivety every day. So we adopt this philosophy of vujardé, and that is to treat something that's very, very familiar as if it's the very first time we've seen it in our lives before, and be in awe of that and awakened with that. It's not an easy thing to do. The brain itself, our biological brain, is actually designed to look for patterns and become habitual. I don't know if you've ever driven across town going from one meeting to another, got to the other side and then suddenly realised you've got no idea what you were doing in that car for the last 20 minutes. You don't know what speed you were going, how many red lights you went through, how many mothers and prams you ran over just to get to the meeting. Have you had that experience? Or is that just me? So it's a little unnerving, so it's a very easy pattern to fall into. So we have to be on guard around that. And as Peter was suggesting, in industries this happens as well, where what we know is all we know, and it becomes habitual. And then when change comes along or somebody even challenges us in what we're doing, we're so entrenched in our own cultural belief system about who we are and what we're all about that we miss the new opportunities. And perhaps now, more than any other time in human history, there's so much change going on that challenge can appear quicker, faster, and with more stealth than ever. And so I'm so delighted to see that you've actually got together, as you obviously do on an annual basis, but particularly around this theme of connections. I think connecting the dots, connecting with each other, connecting ideas, and exploring those is a wonderful endeavour and a good use of your time. So let me just give you a little bit about anthropology as a background, how it works, and then we can sort of start this discussion. When I first attended Auckland University to enrol in anthropology, this was back in the early 80s, and the first thing that happened was we walked in, and we didn't have this sort of technology in those days. We used to have those old overhead projectors, and my professor put this particular picture up on the screen. And this was, we're all newbie anthropologists, full of enthusiasm and curiosity, but nervous as hell, first day on the job. And he put this picture up, and he said, "Can you see the moon?" And he asked us literally to put our hands up, as I've asked you to get involved and put your hand up. He said, "Can you see the moon?" And, you know, being first day at university in anthropology, you wondered whether it was a trick question, is this part of the final exam? And so the answer, of course, is yes, of course I can see the moon. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. And we started to, wonder whether this professor actually had his act together or not. The interesting thing is that he said, because most people can see the moon, what anthropologists' job is to do is to ask the question, can you see the moon seen? That is to step back from the thing that you actually are observing and participating in and actually see the viewpoint from which you are seeing it. I believe that innovation is the art of seeing the seen. So it's actually seeing what's going on and then seeing what you can do about it, what you're not doing about it, what you could be doing about it, or what you should be doing about it. Failure to have that perspective can often lead to inability to act in time. And cultures all around the world have suffered from this exact problem because they are no longer here with us, because they were unable to see the moon from where they were seeing it and therefore act in time to save themselves than the dominant forces of change that are sweeping the world constantly. So how does all this play out in real terms? What does it really mean in real life? I got into anthropology, apparently my mother says, when I was very, very young. I was family's from Manchester, but we moved to a tiny town called Shrewsbury, it's famous in New Zealand, of course, for the biscuits, but it's a little agricultural town on the border of Wales. One of my first childhood memories was going into the marketplace on a Saturday morning with my grandfather. And I used to love spending time with my grandfather, and he finally figured I was old enough to sort of walk the 7 miles it was going to take to get into the town and attend market on Saturday. So I was very, very excited about this first expedition and went in with my grandfather. Really interesting thing happened when I got there was I suddenly realised there's a large number of people there that I could not understand what they were saying. There were Welsh farmers that crossed the River Severn over the bridge and come into market with their produce, their sheep, their goats, their cabbages, etc., their leeks, not surprisingly, to sell. So it struck me as really bizarre that there was people here that I couldn't understand what they were saying. Because you know what it's like when you're a kid, you think your whole neighbourhood is the world, and you assume everywhere is the same. And so this was really kind of weird for me to hear this language going on that I couldn't understand. So I turned to my grandfather and went, "Granddad, who are those people?" And he knelt down and he said, "They're Welsh." Now, I'd never heard of the word, so I didn't know whether that meant they're stupid, or they're mentally infirm, or they can't speak properly. And so I kind of pondered on this for a moment, thought, Welsh, never heard of it, don't know what you're talking about. I said, "I don't understand, Grandad, what does that mean?" And he did a wonderful thing. He bent down and whispered in my ear, and he said, "They're the grown-ups that believe in dragons." Now, being a little kid, I went, whoa. I just thought this was the coolest thing, that there were adults out there that still had this degree of kind of fantasy and optimism and adventure in their lives. I was so excited. I ran all the way home after market, went bursting through the door to Mum and said, Mum, can we move to Wales? They sound like they're awesome people. And it was the start of a lifelong journey exploring other people and seeing who they are, not as a critical factor, but in awe and in appreciation of what it means to be human in different places. I so enjoyed the POFA in the presentation this morning. Did you enjoy that? And this is what I'm talking about. I get goosebumps every time I see culture being alive and practice. This is crucial stuff we witnessed here this morning. It's crucial that you do the same things in your own organisations. I don't know if you're aware, but at the moment, cultures are in big threat all around the world, including organisational culture. I believe organisations, in fact, are the new tribes. You spend far more time often in your own workplace and your workplace culture than you do in New Zealand culture, your ethnic culture, maybe even religious culture. Is that not true? If your boss is in the room, this is where you nod vigorously because you've got to appear to be working hard and putting the hours in. There's an interesting situation going on around the planet at the moment. In anthropology, we believe that language is the bloodline of your culture. When your language dies, your culture is going to follow very soon afterwards. So one of the things I'm going to be encouraging, it'll be a theme running through what I want to share with you this morning, is that you actually communicate with each other, which is a challenge, is it not? Because we're Kiwi. Yeah, and we like being sort of quiet and humble and sitting back, may even have a bit of whakama sort of happening, so we're a little shy about integrating. We don't have that luxury anymore. The world is becoming more challenging, and it is ideas and sharing and communicating and challenging and asking around those that is going to be our saviour, the opportunity to actually rise above this. So languages are dying at the rate of disappearing, never to be spoken again on the planet, on average, every 14 days. So somewhere in the world, every 14 days, a language ceases to be taught, or the last teacher of that language passes away, and there's no more language of that to become. If you imagine that in biological terms, if that was plant life disappearing, one species every 14 days would be out in the streets protesting, wouldn't we? Wouldn't we? Whereas with language, we're quite happy to sit back and let it die, yeah, because we believe that maybe it's not that important. And so delighted to see here in New Zealand we have a culture that is still vibrant and strong with a 1,000-year tradition that is still practiced, still relevant, and still vibrant. So what does all this mean in real terms? Well, with the fascination of other cultures embedded at a fairly early age, I was merrily shipped off to Africa with my family and got exposed to a wonderful variety of different tribes and cultures over there. And it just built on this Welsh experience that I started to think that we human beings are an amazing species in the various forms and way we operate. One of the challenges with anthropology is that you obviously go and spend time and live with these tribes, as I've done so professionally now in both Africa and South America. And the natural inclination is to believe that you go there to study other people and understand who they are. That means it's sort of a natural assumption, I suppose. In reality, what actually happens is when you get there, you end up not studying and revealing who they are, but studying and revealing who you are. So you come face to face with your own prejudices, your own bias, your own history, your own values, your own belief systems. And some of that is not pleasant reviewing. Some of that makes you realise that who you have become as a result of what your practice is, again, restricting your ability to see the world in new and open and possible ways. So it's a big challenge for us when we are going to be innovative and creative, that we have to start with self and understand who have we become, what is our worldview. That's not always easy to do because it's not easy to see ourselves. In fact, in anthropology, they suggest that you never practice anthropology on your own people because you're already blinded to them. Unless you're an archaeologist and look at your own people 1,000 years ago, in which case there's some distance that can separate, but otherwise they don't advise it. I think it's good advice. So I just want to share with you some of the experiences I've seen of arriving in this country when in my youth and maybe having a bit of a sort of slightly different look at what New Zealand is all about. I arrived in the summer of '74. There was a major event going on in Christchurch the very week I arrived. This was the first iconic image I had of what it meant to be in this different country. And every Kiwi that I met, especially at that stage at school, this whole image brought tears to their eyes, national pride to the fore, and goosebumps to their skin. I, of course, was still Anglified and having spent some time in Africa even more so because that gets challenged over there in severe ways. And so I'd been cheering for the guys in the white singlets with the two stripes across here. And so this was kind of interesting to watch the whole nation respond to this image and this event. You'll recall this. A lot of you look old enough to. Yeah, thanks. So I found it fascinating. But the bit that really intrigued me was the colour of the singlet. I thought this is very strange. All the countries I'd been brought up in had vibrant colours and bright colours to celebrate who they were and announce themselves to the world. And these people didn't. They'd chosen the colour of the shadows, the colour of night. It was like they were hiding away from something. So I found that really intriguing. I didn't understand it, but found it intriguing. It started an inquiry into what it means to be Kiwi some years ago. My first day at school, I'd come directly from a part of Africa that at the time was very violent. And because I'd come from the UK, I was on the receiving end of a lot of that violence. And so my parents, unbeknownst to me, had gone in and spoken to the teachers and said, look, this child and his brother are in sort of a bit of a delicate situation. They're a little nervous about entering foreign lands with foreign people because they have suffered and suffered greatly for it. And so would you be willing just to give them some initial special attention, make them feel home, make them feel welcome, let them know that it's safe to be here in New Zealand? And the teachers were very ingratiating and understanding and did so. And so my first day at school, the teachers set some mathematical homework that I was terrified of because the class was advanced and far ahead of where I was very nervous about not being able to do the homework. And she came to me and she said, look, don't worry about the mathematics. What I'd like you to do is a bit of New Zealand homework. I want you to go home and go to the bush just behind your house, because she knew where we were living. She said, I'd like you to go and find me a silver fern and bring it back into the classroom, and we will talk about this nation that you've just arrived in, this country that you're going to be part of and we'll be living in from now, and we'll explore what that means. So I went, cool, that sounds really good. Sounds like better than mathematics, so I was up for it. So I went duly home, went out into the bush and scouted around for ages, and had a bit of a problem, which I had a sleepless night as a result of this problem. I turned up the next day at school very, very nervous, thinking I've just failed my first piece of homework, because I spent hours in the bush and couldn't find a silver fern. Found heaps of green ones, but no silver one, and took it in. I was like in tears, handed it over to the teacher saying, I couldn't find one, I only came up with this. And of course, what did she do? Turned it over and said, silver fern. And I went, what? The thing just struck me as bizarre, because I'd seen the silver fern, of course, on Dick Taylor's singlet. I knew it was important in this country. But I thought, how weird of a nation to choose the underside of a leaf as its national symbol. Who are these people? What's going on here? I spent time in England where they have the bright rose. It's everywhere. You can't ignore it. I spent time in South Africa. They have the protea. This is a cactus flower that's in your face, bright orange, and celebrates itself. So to choose the underside of a leaf as your national symbol, I thought, this is really curious. I don't understand what's going on here. What is it with these people? And so as a culture, fascinated me. And I think this is an important part of being innovative. There's two things you absolutely have to be effective, not just interested, but effective at being innovative. I'm part of a global tribe called thought leaders. These are groups of people that are so-called informed about their particular field of expertise. And I am the resident anthropologist for the Global Thought Leaders group, which basically means I get to hang around with groups of very, very sophisticated and clever people and observe how they think and operate. The great thing about these guys is they're extremely innovative. The word thought leader itself means to innovate and bring forth new ideas into communities. And one of the things that I've noticed is, and this is a crucial part of anthropology as well, so I was quite comfortable with it, to be innovative you need two things. First of all is curiosity. And the second one is inspiration. So you have to be curious about the world you're living in, the situation you face yourself in, and what's going on. And then the second thing is you have to be inspired to participate, to give, to share, to challenge it. Without those two, I can tell you categorically, innovation will not happen. So you have to be curious and you have to be inspired. So that's even going to mean that, if I may, when you're mixing and mingling over the next 2 days, be really curious about the people that are here in the room. There's got to be a lot of expertise and experience. Would you agree? 3 of you do? The rest will let me know later. Sorry, this is really weird. I've just come back from speaking in Australia. The Aussies have got this really weird cultural trait. It's kind of strange, especially coming straight back into New Zealand. In Australia, if I was in a room like this, or any speaker was in a room like this speaking to the audience, if you pose a question to the audience in Australia, they've got this really bizarre habit. They answer it. Whereas in New Zealand, we sit back and go... So one of the things I've been encouraging you to do is get curious about meeting each other. How many of you know people in this room already because you met them, worked with them, grew up with them? Fantastic. Again, really curious thing when you think you know somebody is that you think you know somebody. And so get curious about how have they changed since you last met with them or last saw them or last worked with them. How have things changed for them and what is their response to that? And see wherever possible where you can create some inspiration of the sharing ideas, the opportunity, it may even be the courage of what they've been through and they're still here to tell the tale. So I'd really encourage you to do that. It's the essence, in fact, of where innovation begins. Without the curiosity of the Hamilton jet or the Britain motorbike and so on, and then the inspiration to respond, we'd be nowhere. So it's worthwhile having a look at. So let's just unpack this New Zealand experience. So the school I was at is in Wellington, and so this underside of the leaf had me curious. You don't have to live in Wellington for too long, especially back in those days before you get a bit of a tremor somewhere. And so I got introduced to the idea of fault lines and this whole kind of earthquake situation we have going on in New Zealand, and we've become even more aware of it in the last couple of years. Because of events in Christchurch. But it struck me again that this is kind of fascinating. There's something underneath. Again, we had the underside of the leaf, and now we've got the underneath the ground itself is of major interest and even concern in New Zealand. A school trip eventually took me to where we are here today in Rotorua. I was introduced to boiling mud. Again, this seismic activity under the ground creating mud from underneath coming up. So I started to see there's a pattern here. The Kiwis have got this fascination with what's going on underneath. And it seems to be sort of apparent everywhere. And the more I kind of played with this, the more I kept finding it. which we'll talk about again shortly because it's got an interesting situation. The national bird, flightless, it's on the ground. It's underneath the other birds that are flying. The land itself in the indigenous language here is Aotearoa, obviously transferred into land of the long white cloud, but of course the land has to be underneath the cloud at some stage. We've got this underneath thing happening as well. Te Rauparaha's haka talks about rising up from out of the Coomera pit in the darkness back into the light and reclaiming and repersonifying ourselves and re-identifying with ourselves. Maui fishing up the North Island from where? Underneath the sea. The waka itself, when the tribes were under threat of being invaded or even overrun by another tribe, they would take the waka and put it into either the river or the ocean and sink it to ensure that it was perceived as being worthless to the invading tribe because it was a great heritage and spiritual value. And even in the pōwhiri this morning, we hear the phrase ta waka. It's a metaphor. It's not just, of course, the canoe. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle for transporting us from where we are now to where we truly want to be, and to take us back to where we have come from as and when we need to. So around creativity and innovation, te waka is a powerful metaphor to think about. What are the vehicles we need to take us and your sports or your situation from where you are to where you need to be? It could be, as we just saw in Peter's video, to start with a new piece of technology, a new social network opportunity, and I believe some of the speakers that you'll be hearing from will be investigating what's going on and exploring what's going on around that as well. So a lot of Māori contribution into this as well. Even the kiwi, the legend of the kiwi, of course, was that it used to be a flying bird with bright plumage, but somebody had to volunteer to get down on the forest floor and eat all the grubs and the bugs that were destroying the forage and therefore jeopardising all bird life. And it was the good old kiwi that was willing to be humble enough, roll up its sleeves, get in there and do the hard work. And we're renowned for that, aren't we? Humble enough to do whatever the job is that needs doing and get in there and do it. And I found that out to be particularly true when I went home to the UK. And at that stage, my accent apparently was no longer from Manchester. And so they started hearing this Kiwi sort of slang, made it ridiculously easy to get a job in London. Literally. And I was applying for jobs I had no expertise or ability to do, but I just turned up and just pile on the Kiwi accent. And immediately the employer would think, what? Hard worker. So it made it really easy to get the job because all my English colleagues would be late to work, drink too much tea and spend all day talking about the Premier League. Yeah, whereas I needed a ticket home, so I got in, rolled up my sleeves, and got in and did whatever was required. And we got a reputation for that around the world. At the same time, we have a bit of a contradiction because we suffer from some of this occasionally, don't we? This is, again, a lovely Anglo-Saxon import. So we have the Māori version of it is the humility and the humbleness, which is such a great cultural phenomenon that we seem to embody it even today in New Zealand. But at the same time, we've got the Anglo-Saxon version, which was the tall poppy syndrome, a leftover from William the Conqueror's days in the UK, where William the Conqueror and his fellows used to go around, find the eldest son and cut off their heads, because it was the eldest son that felt that they had heritage rights to the land, and therefore they were going to be the most troublesome, most revolutionary. So William the Conqueror made sure that all the eldest sons lost their heads early, and so mothers spent a lot of time talking to the remaining sons, telling them to keep their head down. Don't stand up, don't get too far ahead of yourself, don't speak out too much. And this is where the tall poppy syndrome developed from, and it was reinforced on the ships coming out here, of course, because ships are very hierarchical. They have to be, don't they? If you're travelling 6 months in a leaky boat, to quote the Finns, to get here, somebody's got to be in command to make sure it happens. So again, you were told to know your place. So it became something that Pākehā cultures in particular brought with us to New Zealand. Again, so it's kind of interesting is don't get too high, come down, keep it low. One of our major kind of sporting feats famous for around the world was this guy, did some phenomenal stuff apparently on a mountain elsewhere in the world. But what personified the thing more than anything else was, of course, the phrase he used once he'd accomplished this, which was what? Not the bastard off. Not that we climbed the highest mountain or how cool was that, dude. We knocked the bastard off. In other words, we took it from its height and brought it back to where it should be, back down here with us. So again, got this fascination with keeping it real, keeping it grounded, and drawing on what's underneath. Our national anthem, when I learned it at school, found it really interesting as well, was God of the Nations at thy feet. It wasn't about rising up, it was keep things low. And we hear this all sounds kind of old-fashioned, it's still showing up in colloquial language today. Have you heard this phrase around, yeah, nah? So we go with yes, but then we immediately go, nah. So it's like we've got this kind of oscillation going on around us. So what does all these cultural symbols, artefacts mean? You know, in other words, so what? What is this actually telling us about who we are and what's going on in our country and our culture here? So I'm going to sort of introduce you to some real basic anthropology, but I'm hoping it'll serve you for the discussions, the observations, and the learning that you have forthcoming for you for the rest of your conference. In anthropology, we sort of look at culture as being in three levels. The top level is the most obvious, it's the visible. It's anything that's the symbol, it's the artifacts and the behaviours. So if we look at the performance we saw this morning, straight away we saw that there was various artifacts, there was various dress code that was brought to fore, and there was particular behaviours that was very ritualised and deep in meaning. But of course, we don't necessarily understand the meaning if you don't speak or know Te Reo or Māori. It's very difficult to actually track what's going on, and so you're just left with the performance, if you like, the artistry and the beauty of the whole thing. So on one level, we've got the visible. If you're lazy, this is as far as you'll go with culture. Yeah, so you go to France and Paris and you'll take a picture of the Eiffel Tower and go, see, I saw the Eiffel Tower. You go to China and you go see the Great Wall and you bring back your photos. So the symbol, just the visual part is where most of us get lazy with culture. That's as far as we go. Of course, what we're really interested in culture, in fact, you don't even understand what a culture is until you delve into the values. Now, there's a lot of confusion around this word values. It gets confused with things like morals and ethics. I make it simple in terms of understanding culture and being innovative because values are critical. If values are not aligned with your activity, you will not be innovative. It's a fact. Yeah? So we have to have highly aligned personal values with the area we're working in to even stand a chance of being innovative and having that part of the neocortex open up to possibility and exploring the new. So what is a value? It's very simple. It's a preference. How many of you would prefer to be in this room over the next 2 days at the conference rather than elsewhere? Don't answer that question, that could be embarrassing. Multiplied by priority. How important is it for you to be in this room? So if you put a value into your life, it's where your preference, how many of you, for example, let's give you a practice. How many of you would prefer to be healthier or fitter than you are right now? Dallas exception, okay, because I presume you're fit already, mate. But the rest of you, most of you, yeah, and I'm the same. So that's the preference. If I'd been following you around with an anthropological video camera filming you over the last 48 hours to gather the evidence that you actually practice that in real life, how many of you are in trouble? How many go, no, mate, don't take that to court? And you kind of got excuses. Oh, yeah, but the weekend was a bit different. It was Aunt Margaret's birthday, and I don't normally drink that much. In fact, I don't normally drink at all, but it was Aunt... Do you get the idea? So the preference is I prefer to be fit. The priority is I'm going to make it happen. That's when you know a value is real, is when you have a preference and you back it up with the prioritising and behaviour, decisions, etc. So to be innovative, you can't afford just to rest with the luxury of preferring to be innovative. We have to prioritise it, and that's why it's so great to see you coming together to discuss, share, and challenge each other around this. You see, a preference with no priority is a wish. I wish I was healthier, I wish I was fitter. If you don't convert it into priority, you're left with a wish, and this is where cultures die. They just stick with preference, no priority, and often even blame other people for the fact that it's been done to them. So that takes us down to the third level, which is what in anthropology we call worldviews. Think of this as your underlying assumptions. It's the way you perceive the world without even realising you're perceiving the world that way. This is what I meant by, can you see the moon seen? I love going back to my family in the north of England and reminding them just how pessimistic they are, because they can't see it. It's always someone else's fault. They're always blaming someone else. The fascination conversations going on at the moment between the City and United members of my family. The family's split in two. Half's got blue blood and the other's got red blood. And there's this kind of, I'm getting texts daily. Which side have you chosen to go on? I said, I've got black blood, I don't care. But it's fascinating to watch the whole thing play out. So the worldview is a critical one. As you go through your discussions and your learnings, of course, listen to the conversations of what people have got to share during the course of the thing, but more importantly, what I'd encourage you to do is to actually go deep and go, does this challenge my thinking? Does this challenge my status quo? Where does this leave me, this idea? Don't just react to, that's dumb, or I disagree. It's actually explore, why do you disagree? Where's that come from? Is it out of fear? Is it out of disappointment? Is it out of the fact that you become habitual and only have one way of thinking? This makes sense, guys? So the more we can do that, and I'm on a bit of I've got to say, I'm on a bit of a mission in New Zealand, sort of in almost any chance I get to speak to any group around this. I think this is crucial for our future, is we've got to leave binary thinking behind to a very large extent. That wonderful gift from the ancient Greeks, binary thinking, everything's black or white, right or wrong, good or bad. It's ideal in certain situations. I love it in surgery, for example. It's a useful thing to have. It's wonderful when my mechanic applies binary thinking. But sport is not about binary thinking. Sport's too complex, isn't it, to cope with binary thinking? So that means we have to be what we call trialectic. At least 3 components have to be part of every single one of your conversations. Yes, no, what if? Yes, no, who else could we talk to? Pass, fail, maybe we're studying the wrong subject to start with. Yes, we can, no, we can't, maybe we're not asking the right question. What's a better question we could ask? Does that make sense, guys? So it's just step out of just the binary. It's so easy to get stuck in. I'm getting tired of going, especially in the corporate world. At the moment, they're under a lot of pressure, as you can imagine, with the GFC. And you walk into these board meetings still, and these are people in high levels of governance. And it's just fascinating to watch them. I get employed to do so. I'm a resident anthropologist with a number of corporates where they ask me to come and observe how they do things. They regularly come out. I know it would never happen to any of your organisations, so please don't think I'm talking about you, because of course it would never happen with your organisation. They regularly have meetings where they come out and they've got no idea what the meeting was for. And they will have invested hours and flown people in from all over the place to have these meetings. 3 hours later they come out and go, what was that all about? Because they get locked into binary. And so a really simple way of addressing that, it's very simple, and you'll see it on every fireside chat and just about every tribal situation anywhere on the planet, is simply raise the question, what is the question we're trying to answer here? How many of you have come to this conference because you were invited and you're delighted to be here, or you happen to be driving through Rotorua, so it was no big deal, you're on the way to Wellington anyway, whatever it happens to be, but have arrived here with no strategy in place? Because the idea is every time you get to a gathering like this, with this many clever people in the room, this many inspirational people, important people in the room, it's useful to have a strategy. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is think about what is the question you want answered by the end of this conference? And who do you need to talk to? What do you need to learn? Where do you need to really pay attention in one of the workshops or the sessions you've got over that maybe gives you the key to answering that question? It's a really good way of guaranteeing you get good value out of every experience you have is go, what's the question we've got to answer here? Yeah, it's a powerful way of addressing ourselves. So this underside, I reckon New Zealand's got a massive advantage culturally, as we've seen Peter talking about the various levels of innovation we have. Carl Gustav Jung had this to say: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct and run, in fact, your life, and you will call it fate. So he said, once you understand who you are and what's really going on, what's really driving you, what's really motivating you, then you can actually start to take ownership of that. You can take responsibility for that and even credit for that if necessary, and start to make the decisions and choices in life that direct you into a future where you truly want to be. Whereas if we don't, we just assume we've got good luck or bad luck. And half of my family is going to be having that conversation tomorrow morning. It's bad luck because of the referee and so on. So how does this play out? So what I'm suggesting is here in New Zealand, we've got a cultural innate advantage to excel in innovation, not because we're brighter than anyone else, or as Peter said, that we have better funding or smarter people in our universities, but we've got a great innate ability to recognise that the importance of what we're doing is the critical factor. In other words, our intent for attempting something is as important as the results we get out of it. And that sounds really simplistic, but I've studied cultures all around the world, and I'm telling you, there's something really unique going on in this land of ours with these conversations. We get deep meaning. We get deep conversations. We saw it this morning. There's many countries in the world would not have had that beautiful ceremonial greeting to start the day. I get a lot of work in Australia, in anthropology work, in corporates, both with government, private sector, the military, everything, simply because I'm from New Zealand. They look at us in awe of the fact we're able to get on with one another, and we've integrated culture, and we're actually proud of one another's contributions into our Ngāti Kiwi culture, because they haven't done that so well over there. Yeah, so if I turn up purely as a business advisor in Australia, they laugh. They go, where are you from? New Zealand. They go, what would you know about business? Go home. You turn up and you go, I'm here to talk about culture. They go, oh, grab a seat. And the notebooks come out. Yeah, so they know we're onto something, and we are. We truly are. So how does that play out? Well, for you guys, how many of you have a strategy in place in your organisation? Show of hands. Yeah. You may not know what it is, but you know there's one floating around the office somewhere. You got one of those? And then we try and take action on that strategy, do we not? Yeah? I'm sure the All Blacks are doing this right now, preparing for June. I'm sure they've got a strategy in place, the transition. We've got players coming and going. We've got a new legacy about to begin. We've got new positioning in the marketplace, if you like. So there's a strategy. How do we accommodate, hanging on to the old and maintaining the amazing winning percentage tradition we have, but also take it into the future. Take action on that, and then we measure our results after we played Ireland and see are we heading in the right direction or not, and do we need to readjust for the new competition. True? So we do this all the time. So that's sort of the given. What I'm talking about, what goes on in New Zealand is that pattern shows up all around the world. And if you just rely on that pattern, you end up in a lot of trouble. You can even end up in a war in the Gulf without meaning to be there. Strategy, action, measurement. Yeah. Here's what happens in New Zealand. We go, yeah, but if we win, what's the point? If I'm going to be successful at this, why would I want to? So we pose this question, and sometimes it's verbally, a lot of it is verbally, but it's often body language shows it alone. You see people just querying. True? Talk me through that one, bro. Yeah? So we're happy to have the conversation, dig a little deeper, rather than just going on sheer opportunity. We go, well, hang on a minute, I can see we could be successful. Why would we want to be? What does it do for us? And so I've had a fascination with this. It's almost like, what are the core belief systems that actually drive that? And I'm going to take you through, I haven't finished the research on this, so please don't attack me if you see me at one of the breaks and go, that was nonsense. You're probably right. I'm not sure it's true myself. But I'm playing with this at the moment. I'm looking at the core belief systems that are almost manifesting within various cultures around the world. Let me just show you some of these kind of more obvious ones. I believe there's an underlying belief system in the United States culture. I spent some time up there late last year just doing a massive amount of research around this. They've got a fundamental belief system in their culture they don't speak about, but it's there. It's how they're seeing the moon, which is progress is good. You want to get anything signed off in the United States, all you've got to do is demonstrate that it's progress. If you go look at their national anthem, all their heroes, anything that's celebrated over there, it's fundamentally about progress is good. Moving forward is good. Improving is good. Make sense? And so they get licensed to commit to a lot of things just by believing in this. In my own homeland, the belief system is this: survival is good. It doesn't say God honor the Queen. What does it say? Save. And you kind of go look at, again, all the who gets made into heroes. In the St. George is saving the village from the dragon. It goes on and on and on. There's all sorts of stories about to become a hero in the UK, you've got to have saved something. You've got to be standing something to save something. And it's understandable. If you go look at the history, these poor people, they've suffered from perennial invasion. Constantly being invaded. My own bloodline, Henderson, is from a Celtic Scottish tribe. We have a notoriously infamous history where one of the few clans that we have a yellow stripe in our tartan. Yes, that's right, it's for cowardice. We're famous for looking at the opposition at a battle going, nope, we're out here. Which is kind of weird because Henderson actually comes from the Viking bloodline, son of Hendrix, which is a ferocious warrior Viking group, a clan. And so I don't know what happened between leaving Denmark and arriving in Scotland, but it might have been the food. We went from being courageous, mighty warriors into chickens. So interesting stuff. So the interesting belief system goes on here. I love this one in Australia. So we've got progress is good in the States, survival is good in the UK. In Australia, mates are good. You can get away with anything in Australia as long as it's good for your mates. And I love talking about this in Australia. Do you know what I'm talking about with this? Have you heard this? Every sentence finishes with this phrase, doesn't it? So how you going, mate? See the footy last night, mate? Good result, mate. So I love teasing them because I say, you know where mate comes from, of course? Inmate. Shipmate. It was inevitable. So what is it in New Zealand? What is our underlying core belief system? And it's going to look frivolous, I'm quite serious about this. Fishing is good. We live in paradise. They had a knowledge wave forum, similar to yourself. The government sponsored it 10 years ago in Auckland. Invited experts from all around the world saying, how can we be more innovative in New Zealand? Because they realised that we couldn't just rely on agriculture and timber as much anymore. We're going to have to come up with ideas and innovation. So all these experts were just delighted to jump on a plane and come down and be part of the conference because, of course, they wanted to come to New Zealand. The interesting thing was no Kiwis turned up. Do you remember this? It made headline news. This is under the Labour government. No Kiwis turned up. And they went, whoa, what's going on? Why aren't Kiwis interested in innovation? So they actually did a massive survey, spent thousands of it, had 4,500 people, which is a big survey in New Zealand, completed to find out why did no one turn up to the knowledge economy innovation conference in Auckland. 2 reasons. It's good weather that weekend. Secondly, it didn't rate high in terms of the priority. The meaning of being successful in innovation and economy in New Zealand hadn't registered. Does it really matter? Look outside the window, look where we are. We're living in a paradise here. That's what's most important, is we spend our life enjoying and celebrating that, not necessarily making progress. So this is wonderful. I've chosen to raise my family in this great nation of ours because of exactly this, because we do live in paradise. But the meaning of being here is sometimes, debatable. We've got one of the world's highest youth suicide rates in New Zealand. Don't you find that fascinating? Worrying, scary, upsetting, but fascinating. I've got family from the north of England. Believe me, those parts in the UK, you're raised there, you'd seriously consider suicide, especially in winter. And, 3 generations of unemployment. But to have it here, it just seems bizarre. So some interesting thinking going on. So what am I really getting at here? You cannot get away with shallow meaning if you want people to innovate and activate in New Zealand. Asking people to innovate is not going to do it because they'd rather be fishing. Asking them for more is not going to do it because they'd rather be hiking. Asking them to give more endeavour is not going to do it because they'd rather be out there helping build that cycling track to go mountain biking when it's done. And why not? We live in paradise and we have the opportunity to celebrate it. So this is our challenge if we're going to step up. And when you get it right, when you demonstrate meaning, when you declare and isolate and propose a vision and an opportunity, Kiwis will respond. I don't know if you're aware of this. We've got along with Australia, by the way, we've got one of the highest levels of volunteerism in the world for the size of our population. So you put up a good cause in New Zealand, you're going to get more people volunteer. And you should know, shouldn't you? Is your industry filled with volunteers? So you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So all you've got to do is have a really good reason. And Kiwis go, yep, count me in, bro. But the meaning of that reason's got to be powerful. It's got to be humane. It's got to make Kiwi life better, Kiwi celebrating better. It can't be just about making the money because we're not interested. Which is interesting, Pete, because you mentioned even some of the other challenges, weren't you, about profiteers or entrepreneurs coming in and almost taking the sports and recreation for solely the financial side. Yeah. Doesn't work that well in New Zealand. We've got to have real belief, real mana in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Make sense, guys? Okay. So let me show you how this all works. So if we go to this New Zealand metaphor of what's underneath counts, here's how it plays out. When you're first challenged by something in New Zealand, what normally happens is there's going to be an immediate response. It's what I call above the line. We'll respond with antagonism on the one hand. That's a very polite way of saying fear. So we'll feel antagonised, which really means we're feeling afraid. Or we'll respond with pride. I don't need that, mate. I'm all good. Yeah, so we have fear or we have pride are our initial responses. The trick is to go beneath that and actually move into some of these other areas. And the first thing you have to do is move into courage. Draw on the courage of yourself and your fellows to actually meet the challenge. Courage is a French word, as you probably know, which stands for courage. Core means heart. Age is time. This is heart time. This is feel it time. This is get the meaning, dig deep time. So to be courageous, and we've got a history of courageous individuals and courageous teams operating, haven't we? Christchurch was an amazing recent reminder of this. The courage that exists in this place is phenomenal because we're challenged by the environment we live in. So this is not far away. It's just sitting below the surface. As leaders of your own organisational tribes, this is an area you should be constantly reminding people about, is to be courageous. We don't have all the answers yet, but let's work together. When you have courage, then you can trust one another because you know you're not going to be let down by your fellow peers and colleagues. So you move from courage into trust. And when you have trust, you move from can-do into the possibility of will-do, which gives us a sense of willingness, which is where the idea gets transformed into action. This is the difference between inventing and innovation. Innovation is an idea that is acted upon, not just created. So as Peter said himself in the introduction, we don't have to actually come up with all the ideas. We've just got to find one like a whistle, transform it from the military onto the sports field, and suddenly we've been innovative. So the opportunity to share, bounce ideas around in the group will be phenomenal. Peter did talk about Kiwi innovation. I didn't want to go on and touch too much on those. I just thought there was some that are crucial for you to think about here. Again, especially talking about that fishing thing. This one's a critical Kiwi innovation. We invented and were the first to actually practice the 40-hour work week. Did you know that? Kiwis invented and brought into power the 40-hour work week. Why? Because I'd rather be fishing, bro. Yeah? We said, work's good, but it's only so good. There's other things in my life that are equally, if not more important than work. Let's cap it, shall we, at 40. Not a bad idea, huh? But again, reflection of Kiwis. There's other things more important than just doing the work. We have another strength, don't we? Number 8. Which is kind of interesting because we have number 8 on the one hand and we have tall poppy syndrome on the other. Come up with a good idea, just don't celebrate it. Come up with a good idea, but don't announce and get too arrogant about it. Yeah, so we've got this massive contradiction, which makes it tricky with our youth, where we're saying, look, be innovative, come up with good ideas, but settle down at the same time. We're sending mixed metaphors and mixed messages here. So choose which one do you want. Good ideas? Yeah? Or do you want to keep people where they are? Humility's good. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the most innovative people on the planet, one of the hallmarks of their personality is humility. Yeah. So, powerful combination. Another amazing incident, I don't know if you are aware of this as well, but the New Zealand Maori culture was rated as if it was said if it was a nation of its own, that it would actually register as the 4th most entrepreneurial nation on the planet right now in terms of the innovation, and there's a lot of kind of background details on this as well. Number 1 was Denmark, number 2 was Canada, United States, and then Maori culture came in after that. So there's an innate ability to be creative, be expressive, adapt quickly and be agile. And of course we need to do that. And I think one of the crucial innovations that maybe you didn't mention in relation to sport, and I believe this is just, it would be remiss of us not to have recognised this, was of course Carlos Spencer's banana kick. So the time you've got left together, if I may, I just want to share with you 5 ideas that have come out of anthropology. From this gentleman here, Gabriel Tarde, as a French anthropologist. He identified when innovation was first kicking off in the Industrial Revolution, as an anthropologist, he identified what was the 5 most effective ways you can bring your own personality, your own notion to play, to be innovative. And this applies to everybody. You don't need to be an expert in a particular field to do this and do it well. So I just want to quickly step you through those 5 to finish off. The first one is you have to gather new knowledge. It's kind of an obvious one, but he said this: what we know is all we know, and it's probably not enough. So I don't know about you, but in my field, my industry in anthropology is just full of people that have spent their whole career becoming experts in a tiny subject matter. Yeah. So we end up being quite micro. They can be experts on, one artifact off a tribe on an island off the coast of Samoa, and they'll be the most knowledgeable person in the world on that one particular artifact. But how does that serve the changing world? Well, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, so what we know is all we know. We've got to be careful with that. Bernard Shaw had this to say: progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. So be flexible with your thinking during the course of the conference. Be open to be challenged and think in ways you haven't, and even play with a really good response we use a lot in helping organisations become more innovative is every conversation you have is, when you're listening to someone, is respond with yes and, or yes but. Yes and, I can see how that works in cricket, maybe we could use that in hockey, that's a really good idea, thanks very much. Or, yes, I can see how that works in cricket, but could you, any ideas on how you transfer it over to hockey, because we've got some differences in the way. So it's a really good way of navigating your way through the conference, very simple. And we have to do it. We're in a world of constant change. Just to have a look at this, I found this staggering. Just reviewing, I had to review the last 10 years at a conference recently, had to kind of look at some of the changes. 10 years ago, this is what was going on in the world. Interesting, huh? I mean, some of the things that we now take for granted, the Googles, the Facebooks, Apple being the #1 organisation on the planet, 10 years ago it was nearly going out of business. Staggering. Look at that retirement figure. My father's not happy about that. He was well and truly supposed to retire. Yeah, he's gone another 5 years, and I just caught up with him in the weekend. He's saying probably got another 5 years on top of that. Fortunately, he loves his job, but otherwise it'd be challenging, wouldn't it? So invest time and energy into ideation. Ideation is not creativity. Ideation is understanding how you come up with ideas. Pay attention to yourselves. Where do the ideas come? I know for an absolute fact my best ideas come when I'm on long-distance driving. Not sitting in front of the computer working or in my study working. I know my best ideas always happen when I'm in the car, so it's not unusual for me to get up 2 o'clock in the morning, go for a long drive, solve the problem, come back. So it's just paying attention. That's what ideation is all about, is understanding that. Second thing he said is form an attitude. That's usually not a problem in New Zealand. We normally have attitudes, don't we? But this is really careful. He said you've got to choose the attitude you're taking towards the challenge and the problem you're facing. I had a really good example of this many, many years ago. I was working with the Auckland Blues rugby. I should point out it was when they were winning. It was back under Graham Henry's, or Sir Graham Henry's tenure, as he's known now, and I was working with this mob. Our job was to help them transition effectively from amateur culture into a professional culture. They'd been professional for a number of years, but they still kind of had this amateur culture hanging out. So Graham brought me in to try and help them understand how the culture was still stuck in the past and needed to be moved to the front. I had a really interesting incident happened on the very first night we turned up at Eden Park while they were training. The guys were all running around the field warming up, and so I just wanted to kind of get a feel for where all these people were thinking from and what they were all about. And the first player sort of came running past. I just called him over. I'm standing there with my clipboard and said to him, "Sorry, mate, to interrupt your warm-up. I just wondered if you could help me out here. Can you just explain to me why are you here tonight?" He went, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Look, mate, we had a pre-season game last weekend," and he says, "I've got to say, it was absolutely shocking. You know, I thought I trained hard over the summer, but clearly not hard enough. My job is to secure the loose ball whenever it becomes free and secure that for the guys, and quite frankly, I was atrocious. I messed up. The opposition guy kept beating me to it, and I reckon we actually lost the game because of my performance not securing that loose ball. So I don't know what Graham's got in mind for us tonight, but I'm here tonight to sprint really hard over those first couple of metres every time the ball goes out of play or we're asked to go do something. I want to be the first off the mark and beat everyone else. I want to get that edge back." I'm like, "Cool, thanks very much," and off he went. Second player comes running round. Call him over and said, "Sorry to interrupt your warm-up, mate. Just wondered if you can help me out here. Just wanted to ask you a question. Why are you here tonight?" He looked at me like I was absolutely insane. He went, "'Cause it's Wednesday." One of those players was a legend known as Michael Jones. The other one wasn't. I'll let you figure out which was which. It's bring in the attitude. What are you here for? What have you come to this conference for? You're here just to make up the numbers and go through the motions, or have you got something in purpose in mind? When you have something in purpose in mind, that's where the innovation, the creativity gets triggered off. And we know this because of how the brain works and operates. So that's what I was talking about there, is be willing to participate and get involved while you're here. Third step, the anthropologist talked about, is you've got to do, once you've got an idea, decide to either accept it or reject it, and do that as fast as you can. So you want to fail fast with an idea. Here's an idea that failed really, really fast. Some genius at Reebok in Germany put this campaign out. Obviously decided they didn't need female customers anymore. Within 7 days, they hadn't sold a single item to a female customer in Dusseldorf. So that idea failed really fast, and they had to put out a public apology afterwards. And if the idea fails fast, that's good, but then just ask for more ideas from your people. You know, make contact with people and ask them to bring in other ideas, other opportunities. When you've got an idea and you think it's going to be a good one, fourth step is implement and use it. Don't just sit and talk about it. Go out and give it a go. Practice it. See if it actually does what you need it to do and deliver it. You've in an industry that's got a history of innovative ideas. There's just some up here behind me that were put out by Wired magazine last year, and some of what they thought were the most innovative ideas that came up in sport. My personal favourite is the cleats on football boots. Prior to those things coming out, I used to constantly slip over playing football and end up with grass burns. You know, I've still got scars on my legs from grass burns from when I was a nipper. So actually having studs on the boots was just amazing stuff. So you're in an industry, and as we saw earlier slides, you're in an industry that does this really, really well. And the fifth one, this is really important, Kiwis, if I may. Confirm your decision. When you've actually done something that's worked well, it's really, really important. And I know it's not cool in this country to do this. You need to celebrate if you've just had a great idea and it's worked. And this has nothing to do with arrogance. This is to report into the brain that what you just observed worked. And every psychologist will tell you that you have a system in here called the RAS, Reticular Activated System. What it basically does is monitor what's going on and choose which bits you're going to remember to replicate. It's why we can drive across town without having to pay attention. So the brain actually takes hold of what works, hangs onto it, because it's going to keep you alive. This is a critical component of ceremony. So celebrating, and I believe you've got a celebrationary evening this evening, is that true? Yeah. It's really important as a group and as a community, and we just need to get really good at this in New Zealand, is when we win is celebrate like we mean it. When we applaud, celebrate like you and applaud people like you actually genuinely mean it. Because the RAS, the reticular activated system, wants to know, is this worthwhile paying attention to? Do I need to hang on to this, and will I be using this again? So anything that's good and powerful and works, that's exactly what we want to be doing it. If you don't, it just assumes it's part of the background. So this was in your brochure, advice for you today. I'd heed that advice. I think it's great advice. And this is from the Gretchen and people who organise your conference here. This is what they're encouraging you to do. I think it's great advice in terms of you want to be more innovative and creative together. I just want to finish off by kind of looking at some of the downside of what we don't do too well in New Zealand. And this isn't negative, it's just an opportunity to rise above this, again, step out of our own shadow and do better than we do this. I just believe New Zealand as a culture, as an economy, is too small for us to have silo mentality. Again, I'm sure it doesn't happen in your organisations. But a lot of my clients in the corporate world, this is the norm. You know what I'm talking about? Where IT's at war with marketing, sales are at war with dispatch. Yeah. So it's a phenomenon that's really popular overseas. We don't have the luxury for that in New Zealand. We're too small. Break the barriers down. See them as grown-ups that believe in dragons, get into that department and get curious about dragons. Why is this important? Because in New Zealand, I'm often asked when I go, especially to Australia, what's so special about this particular tribe? Why are they the most successful sports team in the history of sport in terms of winning percentages? And I genuinely believe it's because of this. And you could say even more so with the New Zealand Māori rugby teams as well, is that they built culture first and team second. So we've seen players come and go through these teams over the years, haven't we? We've lost a couple of legends just recently, sadly. But the culture lives on, and that's when you know you've got something really powerful. It doesn't matter who turns up, that culture's the same. This is the only sporting team I'm aware of, including the Manchester United and the Manchester Cities of the world, and especially Manchester City. Oh, did the bias slip out? They don't have the culture, but they do have a team. Yeah. And what I can tell you as an anthropologist, you're going to go nowhere fast over a long period of time if you don't have culture. There's an African proverb that says you can go fast alone, but you go far together. I hope you go far together in your journey. I love what you guys stand for and are contributing into this great nation of ours. Sport and Rex has obviously got a really powerful role to play, both in mental health and in physical health in New Zealand. Even the root words around recreation is important. It's recreation. It's a recreate opportunity. It's a restart opportunity. And even exercise is originally from the same root word of exit as an exorcism. So exercise is a way of actually getting our inner demons out so we don't take them home and take them out on other people, etc. So kia kaha. Thank you so much for having me. I wish you well for the conference, and I'd love to see what you actually do with all the ideas you come up with here today. Thank you.
Oh, it's my task to thank Michael. What a fascinating, thought-provoking presentation, so thank you, Michael. A lot of takeouts from that and a lot of challenges. One for me is that we tend to be in a very busy sector. If you ask anyone in this sector how they're going, they say busy, and I think the challenge for us is to find some time to think. So a big takeout for me is that. Curiosity plus inspiration equals innovation. I think very fitting for this conference. And what is the question we're trying to answer? So thank you, Michael. Can you join me in thanking Michael for a very thought-provoking presentation?